Hello, my name is Ananya. I am 17, a current teen advisor from Shreveport, Louisiana, and last summer I had the opportunity to intern at my local juvenile court. So, before I share my story, I want to say that I will be touching briefly on topics of inequity, marginalization, poverty, sexual assault, and incarceration. If these topics are difficult or triggering for you in any way, please do not hesitate to take a beat and take care of yourself, whether that means stepping upstairs for some fresh air, stepping away from the main room, or talking to our safety and security lead, Chandira Davis. Please do what is best for you. Now, I want to start by answering the questions I had when first going into my internship. What is juvenile justice? What does it mean to be a juvenile in a detention center? And by the end of this talk, what does it mean to be a girl who finds herself interacting with the criminal legal system and placed in a juvenile detention center? Put simply, juvenile justice is how kids up to age 17 are prosecuted and judged by the law. If we were to be accused of committing a crime, we would have our case heard at the juvenile level, and thus be punished differently than an adult would. If a judge determined we were guilty of a felony or a misdemeanor level crime, we would be put in a juvenile detention center, the parallel to an adult prison. It is important to know, though, that in some places here in the US and globally, youth can be charged as adults and end up in adult prisons and jails as well. On any given day, nearly 60,000 youth under age 18 are incarcerated in juvenile jails and prisons in the US. My state of Louisiana has the highest incarceration rate in the world, meaning there are more people per capita behind bars there than anywhere else globally. We rank 49th in the US in both poverty and education, and in my city, 27% live below the poverty line. So according to the numbers, we live in a perpetual state of crisis. As such, my director at juvenile court describes our work as the front lines. So when I entered my internship, I was completely naive. I knew these basic facts, but I didn't actually understand how kids my age ended up in the legal system. I thought strictly in the way society had programmed me to. If a kid broke the law, they are a criminal, and they should serve time and learn their lesson. But after reading my very first case file, I realized this mindset is what fails people every day. So I want to walk you through that file that changed my mind. This one was of a 15-year-old girl who was charged with battery of a school teacher. Those were the facts on the first page. It's what would make a newspaper headline, right? But I was asked to basically do a case study on this girl, so I had to dig deeper. It turned out her mother had her when she was 17. Her mom was already living in poverty at the time, so she survived because of the support from different men to care for and fund life for her and her daughter. Thus, she ended up with 2 more kids. Each father's was different, but both were abusive men. One of those men repeatedly sexually assaulted the girl I was case studying when she was very young. It left her with what we call complex trauma, and thus a number of trauma triggers. Because of all of these things, the girls went on to have a very unhappy childhood. She had no financial security, relied on junk food and school lunches for sustenance, went to neighborhood schools where she was diagnosed with behavioral issues, and finally made it to high school, where she developed an unhealthy relationship to drugs while simply trying to cope. Eventually, in class one day, she threw an object at a teacher because she heard a sound that reminded her of her childhood abuser. Her trauma was triggered, and she lashed out. Neurologically, she genuinely couldn't control that action of her body going into a panic. Now, I could take another 10 minutes and explain how that process works in the brain, but instead, I am just going to ask you to trust me. This 15-year-old girl had been neglected and broken by our world, and now saw herself in front of a judge who, by law, sentenced her to 30 days in our detention center. I went on to learn that every female-identified youth who has ever entered our local detention center has a history of sexual assault, trafficking, or trauma. In the US, what is true is that we incarcerate the traumatized. And after speaking with probation officers, security guards, and sitting in the courtroom myself, I know there are more single mothers and grandmothers in the court lobby than any other type of guardianship, all trying to provide for their children in the way they know best. So as I have started to define juvenile justice for myself, I don't see the limited technical definitions I started with. I see an issue of inequity, generational trauma, systemic oppression, and poverty, amongst others. I see a system that disproportionately incarcerates people of color, LGBTQIA+ people, and survivors. I see an issue where mothers are at the front lines. I see youth, especially girls who are in these detention centers, as kids who have not seen justice for the crimes committed against them. I see the story of the girl from my very first file. We are all here today because of varying levels of privilege, from funding to the schools we attend to simply the food on our tables. But I ask you, would we really be here at a summit in DC if it wasn't for all of that? if it wasn't for support to face the various levels of oppression we are expected to navigate. It is always hard to finish a race if you've had to start 100 miles behind everyone else. I know I wouldn't be able to. The girl's story I shared with you is the story of millions who have gone through the juvenile justice system. Each is looked down on by members of their society and thus policymakers. Each is blamed for their city's rising crime rates or seen as a strain on taxpayer money. But really, each deserves our empathy. So I ask you to please let go of the narrative that you would have been the success story. The thought so many people keep in the back of their brain of, well, if I was in her position, I would have just made different, better choices and never ended up in the system. Because the truth is, girls who do enter the system don't even have the luxury of choices. They often are just trying to survive. I'm not saying they don't make a mistake, but I'm saying there is always a reason. What would it be like if instead of asking what they've done, we ask what happened to them? What happened to make them survive so strongly? A pillar of this summit is training us to be better advocates. So I want to leave you with a few calls to action. I ask you to locate your closest juvenile detention center. Mine was actually just a 3-minute drive from my school. Call and see if they could use a drive for educational resources or ensure they provide free menstrual products to their inmates. Learn about how legislation impacts youths who are being prosecuted in your community. And most of all, recognize how powerful the voice and experience of the incarcerated and formerly incarcerated can be in your advocacy, movements, and development. I titled this Girl Talk, Juvenile Justice, the Thief of Girlhood, because that is what happens to girls in the system every day. Their joy, spirit, and passion never get to develop. Their dreams are never fostered. They are disappeared from their communities. But after today, I hope you see them differently from how society tells you to. I hope you see them as resilient and in need of understanding in an equitable justice system, and I hope you see yourselves as capable of leading that change. Thank you.